I finally remembered that his number was blocked. A year had passed since our breakup, and I'd initially done it for self-preservation. But with us living together again, it made no sense. The instant I removed the block, my screen lit up. 52 notifications poured in. I began reading the torrent of messages, and my eyes filled with tears at the very same time.
Story based on true events. Names, locations, and some facts have been altered to preserve the privacy of those involved.
I never imagined that a global crisis would force me back into the arms of the one man I'd abandoned in my darkest hour, or that sharing a home during lockdown would expose a truth I'd been running from for over a year. My name is Rachel, and this is the story of how losing everything led me to find the one thing I'd been searching for my entire life, how brokenness became the pathway to redemption, and how a second chance at love taught me that sometimes the greatest transformations happen when we have nowhere left to run. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, where the mountains touched the sky and everyone knew your name before you introduced yourself. It was the kind of place where ambition felt like betrayal, where dreaming bigger than the valley meant you didn't appreciate what you had. But I wanted more. I wanted the noise, the chaos, the endless possibility of somewhere that didn't fit into a postcard. So at 18, I packed 2 suitcases and a heart full of desperate hope, boarding a plane to New York City to attend college. My mother cried at the small regional airport, her hands trembling as she smoothed my hair one last time. My father stood silent, his jaw tight, his eyes saying everything his mouth wouldn't. I promised I'd call every Sunday. I promised I'd come home for Thanksgiving. I promised I wouldn't forget where I came from. But the girl who left Idaho that morning had no idea how far she'd fall before she'd understand what home really meant. New York swallowed me whole, and I let it. The subway rumble became my heartbeat. The sidewalk crowds my daily pilgrimage. The city lights my new constellation. I enrolled at NYU, drowning myself in business administration textbooks and caffeine, in networking events and internship applications, building the life I'd sketched out in my teenage journals back in Boise. I was finally becoming someone, finally proving that small-town girls could conquer the world. That's where everything truly began, in my senior year, at a friend's birthday party in a cramped Brooklyn apartment where the music pounded so loud, my ribcage vibrated and the cheap wine flowed faster than conversation. I was laughing with my roommate Jessica near the kitchen island, complaining about our capstone projects, when I saw him across the room. His name was Daniel. He had this way of existing in a space that made you notice him, without him demanding attention. Tall, with dark hair that fell slightly into his eyes, wearing a simple gray sweater that somehow looked intentional. He was studying architecture at Pratt Institute, and when someone asked him about his thesis project, his hands moved through the air like he was building something invisible, something beautiful, something that mattered. We started talking around midnight, long after most people had left or passed out on the couch. He told me about growing up in Queens, about his father who had passed away 5 years earlier, about his mother who still cooked Sunday dinners even though it was just the 2 of them now. He asked me about Idaho, and instead of the usual mockery I'd learned to expect from East Coast natives, he listened like it mattered, like my small-town childhood wasn't something to apologize for. When the party finally ended around 3 in the morning, he walked me to the subway. As the train pulled away, I watched him through the scratched window until he disappeared into the crowd, and I felt something shift in my chest, something terrifying and inevitable, like the first crack in a dam before everything breaks. We started dating 2 weeks later, after he tracked down my number through our mutual friend and asked if I wanted to get coffee. That coffee turned into dinner. Dinner turned into a walk through Central Park, and suddenly we were inseparable. Those first months felt like a movie, the kind where everything glows golden and the soundtrack swells at just the right moments. Daniel would sketch buildings on napkins while we ate dollar pizza slices in Little Italy, his pencil moving with a confidence I envied. We'd spend entire Saturdays wandering through different neighborhoods, his hand warm in mine, discovering hole-in-the-wall bookstores and vintage record shops and bakeries that smelled like childhood. He introduced me to his mother, Margaret, a kind woman in her early 60s with laugh lines around her eyes and flour permanently dusted on her apron. She lived in the mother-in-law suite behind their main house in Queens, a small but cozy space that Daniel had helped design after his father's passing. She preferred her independence, cooking her own meals in her kitchenette due to strict dietary restrictions her doctor had ordered, while Daniel managed his own space in the main house. Margaret welcomed me with homemade apple pie and stories about Daniel as a boy, how he'd spent hours building elaborate structures out of cardboard boxes, how she'd known even then that he was meant to create things. I graduated in May, Daniel in June. We'd been together for 2 years by then, 2 years that felt both infinite and impossibly brief. We were making plans, the kind young people make when they're terrified of jinxing something precious but can't help dreaming anyway. I could see our future laid out like a blueprint, every room designed, every detail considered. I'd landed a job at a corporate office for a nutritional supplement company, a decent position for a recent graduate with a good salary and room for advancement. Daniel had been hired by a respected architectural firm in Manhattan, working on commercial projects that had him coming home with stories about design challenges and difficult clients. We talked about getting an apartment together, about engagement rings and wedding venues, about the life we'd build brick by invisible brick. I thought I knew what happiness looked like. I thought I'd finally figured out the formula for a perfect life. But then something inside me started to break and I didn't know how to stop it. It started small, so small I convinced myself it was just stress, just adjustment, just the normal struggles of postgraduate life. Mornings where getting out of bed felt like moving through concrete. Days where colors seemed muted, like someone had turned down the saturation on my entire existence. I'd stare at my computer screen at work, reading the same email 5 times without comprehending a single word. My colleagues would laugh at something during meetings and I'd smile automatically, but inside I felt nothing, just a hollow echo where emotion should be. Daniel would text me during lunch breaks, asking how my day was going, and I'd type back cheerful responses while tears rolled silently down my face in the bathroom stall. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't articulate this darkness that had settled over everything like fog rolling in from the ocean, thick and cold and suffocating. Depression, my doctor called it, after I finally dragged myself to an appointment 3 months into this nightmare. Clinical depression. She handed me pamphlets with smiling people on the covers, talked about chemical imbalances and serotonin levels and therapy options. She wrote prescriptions with names I couldn't pronounce, medications that promised to restore balance, to bring back the light. But I couldn't accept it. I was Rachel from Idaho, the girl who'd conquered New York City, who'd built a life from nothing but determination and student loans. I wasn't supposed to be someone who couldn't function, who cried for no reason, who faked smiles until my face ached. This wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't who I was supposed to be. I started pulling away from Daniel without even realizing I was doing it. His texts went unanswered for hours, then days. His calls went straight to voicemail because I couldn't bear to hear the concern in his voice, couldn't stand to lie one more time about being fine. When we were together, I was physically present but emotionally absent, my mind 1,000 miles away, drowning in a darkness I couldn't articulate. I saw the confusion in his eyes, the hurt he tried to hide behind supportive smiles. He'd reach for my hand and I'd let him hold it, but I felt nothing. Not because I didn't love him, but because I couldn't feel anything at all anymore. The world had gone numb, and I was disappearing into the void. One October evening, 6 months into this living nightmare, we sat in his car outside my Brooklyn apartment. Rain streaked the windows, transforming the city lights into watercolor blurs. Daniel had picked me up from work, suggesting we grab dinner at our favorite Thai place, but I couldn't pretend anymore. The words came out before I could stop them, sharp and final like a door slamming shut. I need time. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. Time for what? Time to figure out what I want. Time to figure out who I am. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. We can figure it out together, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Whatever you're going through, we face it together. That's what we do, Rachel. That's what people who love each other do. But I shook my head, staring at my hands in my lap. I can't drag you through this. I need to do this alone. What followed was one of the worst conversations of my life. Daniel fought for us with every word, every memory, every promise we'd made. He reminded me of the night we met, of our first kiss in Central Park under the cherry blossoms, of the morning he'd made me breakfast after I'd stayed up all night studying for finals. He told me he loved me, that he wasn't going anywhere, that he'd wait as long as it took. But I'd already made up my mind. I was drowning, and in my fractured logic, I convinced myself that letting him go was protecting him from being pulled under with me. When I finally stepped out of that car, rain soaking through my jacket in seconds, I didn't look back. If I had, I might have seen him crying behind the wheel, his forehead pressed against his hands, his shoulders shaking. But I walked away, and with every step, I felt myself sinking deeper into the darkness. The months that followed were the worst of my life, a blur of gray days bleeding into gray nights. I moved through each day like a ghost, going through motions without meaning. Work, apartment, sleep, repeat. My inbox filled with unread emails. My phone collected dust on my nightstand. I blocked Daniel's number because seeing his name on my screen made the pain unbearable, made the guilt twist like a knife in my chest. Jessica tried to help, bringing me food, forcing me to shower, sitting with me in silence when I couldn't bear to talk. But even her patience wore thin eventually. I was impossible to reach, locked inside myself, drowning in a prison of my own making. Then something unexpected happened, something I never saw coming. Jessica's older sister invited us to a church service one Sunday in December. I almost said no, almost stayed in bed like I did most Sundays, but something made me agree. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was divine intervention, though I didn't believe in such things back then. The church was a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, nothing like the small white chapel I'd attended sporadically as a child in Idaho. The worship music was contemporary, the people young and genuine, the atmosphere somehow both casual and sacred. The pastor, a man in his 40s wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, spoke about being lost, about feeling broken, about the moment when you realize you can't fix yourself alone. Something cracked open inside my chest during that service, something I'd kept locked and guarded for so long I'd forgotten it existed. Tears started streaming down my face, silent at first, then accompanied by sobs I couldn't control. Strangers around me kept singing, kept worshiping, and no one stared or judged or made me feel like I was disrupting anything. After the service, a woman named Grace approached me, her smile kind and knowing. She didn't ask what was wrong or why I was crying. She just handed me a tissue and invited me to their young adults group on Wednesday nights, writing down the address and time on a slip of paper she pressed into my hand. I went that Wednesday. Then I went again. And again. Over the next few months, I discovered something I'd been missing my entire life, something I hadn't even known I was searching for. It wasn't just religion or routine or rules. It was relationship, connection to something greater than myself, a purpose beyond my own pain. I started reading the Bible, attending a small group, learning about grace and redemption, and the radical idea that my brokenness didn't disqualify me from love. I learned that Jesus wasn't just a historical figure or religious icon, but a living presence, a source of peace I'd never experienced. The depression didn't disappear overnight because that's not how healing works. But slowly, incrementally, I started feeling again. Colors seemed brighter. Food tasted like something other than cardboard. I could laugh without it feeling performative. By March, I'd completed several counseling sessions, developed better coping mechanisms, and genuinely smiled for the first time in almost a year. Looking back, I can admit the truth now. My depression was a symptom of a deeper spiritual emptiness, a soul-level hunger I'd tried to fill with achievement and relationships and city lights. Finding faith didn't erase the chemical imbalance, but it gave me a foundation to stand on while I fought through it. Jesus became real to me, not as a concept but as a companion, walking with me through the darkness, reminding me that I was never truly alone. But there was one thing I couldn't bring myself to do, one person I couldn't face. I couldn't reach out to Daniel. Part of me wanted to, desperately. I'd unblock his number late at night, stare at his contact information, my thumb hovering over the call button, then close my phone and tell myself it was better this way. I convinced myself that too much time had passed, that he'd moved on, that showing up in his life again would be selfish. So I focused on other things. I enrolled in an MBA program in international business at Columbia, a prestigious program I'd been accepted to before my breakdown. I worked at the supplement company during the day, took classes in the evening, and tried to rebuild the life I'd let crumble. Then March became April. April became May, and with it came an unexpected development. I met someone on a dating app, a financial analyst named Ryan, who checked all the right boxes on paper. Attractive, successful, educated, polite. We went on dates to nice restaurants where he ordered expensive wine and talked about market trends and investment strategies. We had pleasant conversations about nothing important. He kissed me goodnight after our third date, pressing his lips against mine outside my apartment building, and I felt absolutely nothing. Not the spark I'd felt with Daniel, not even mild interest. Just a hollow acknowledgement that this person existed. We lasted 3 months before I ended it, sitting across from him at a coffee shop in Midtown, watching his face register relief more than disappointment. "You're not really here," he said, stirring his latte absently. "You're somewhere else, with someone else. I don't know who he is, but you should probably figure that out before you try dating again." He was right, but I wasn't ready to admit it yet. So I threw myself into my studies, into my MBA program, into building a future that didn't include the past I'd left behind. I told myself I was happy, that I was healed, that I'd moved on. I told myself these things so many times I almost believed them. Then 2020 arrived, and with it came a crisis none of us saw coming. The first whispers of a virus spreading overseas seemed distant, abstract, something that happened to other people in other places. Then suddenly it wasn't distant anymore. It was here, in New York City, spreading through the 5 boroughs like wildfire. By mid-March, everything shut down. The supplement company I worked for, already struggling financially, laid off half their staff. I was part of that half, receiving the news via a cold email on a Friday afternoon. The MBA program went remote. The city that never slept fell silent, the streets empty, the subway cars abandoned, the skyline dark, stores closed, restaurants shuttered. The economy collapsed like a house of cards, and I found myself completely alone, unemployed, running out of money, with nowhere to turn and no way home. My savings evaporated within weeks, eaten up by rent and groceries, and the endless small expenses that never stop even when your income does. I called my parents in Idaho, my voice shaking as I explained the situation. They wanted to help, but they were both retired, living on fixed incomes, dealing with their own concerns. My mother cried on the phone, telling me to come home, but the airports had shut down, flights canceled indefinitely. I was trapped in a city that had become a ghost town, in an apartment I couldn't afford, watching my life unravel for the second time in 2 years. This time, though, I had faith to hold on to, a belief that somehow, some way, there would be a path forward. I just couldn't see it yet. Late one night in early April, unable to sleep, I scrolled mindlessly through social media on my phone. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just trying to distract myself from the panic clawing at my throat. That's when I saw it, a post from Daniel, the first I'd seen in over a year. My heart stopped. His profile picture showed him smiling, though the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The post was simple, direct, almost desperate. "Looking for a roommate to help split expenses during this crazy time. Have an extra bedroom in Queens. DM if interested." I stared at that post for what felt like hours, my finger hovering over the message button, my mind racing through 1,000 scenarios and consequences. This was insane. This was impossible. We hadn't spoken in over a year. I'd broken his heart, disappeared from his life, blocked him from reaching out. What right did I have to show up now, desperate and needy, asking for help? But as I looked around my tiny apartment, at the overdue rent notice on my counter, at my dwindling bank account balance on my laptop screen, I realized I didn't have any other options. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I didn't have anyone else to turn to. Pride was a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. My hands shook as I typed out a message, deleting and rewriting it a dozen times before finally hitting send at 2 a.m. "Hi, Daniel. I know this is unexpected and you have every right to ignore this, but I saw your post about needing a roommate. I lost my job due to the pandemic and I'm in a really difficult situation financially. I want to be completely honest that this would purely be a roommate arrangement to split expenses, nothing more. If you're still looking and willing to consider it, I'd really appreciate talking. I understand if the answer is no. Rachel." I hit send and immediately wanted to take it back, but it was too late. The message was out there, floating in the digital void, carrying with it all my desperation and shame and hope. I set my phone face down on my nightstand and stared at the ceiling, praying for the first time in hours, asking God to guide whatever happened next, to give me strength for whatever answer came. The notification sound woke me the next morning. I'd fallen asleep sometime after 4, exhausted from anxiety and overthinking. My phone screen showed a message from Daniel, sent at 7 a.m. My heart pounded as I opened it, my hands trembling so badly I almost dropped the phone. "Hi, Rachel. Yes, I'm still looking for a roommate. We should talk about logistics and expectations. Can you call me this afternoon?" That was it. No warmth, no coldness, just practical efficiency. I didn't know if that was a good sign or a bad one, but it was a response, and right now, that was all I needed. I called him at 1 p.m. exactly, my stomach twisted in knots, my prepared speech evaporating the moment I heard his voice. "Hello? Hi, Daniel. It's me, Rachel. Thank you for responding to my message. I know this is really weird and it's fine, he interrupted, his tone neutral, professional. Let's just talk about the practical stuff. The room is available immediately. Rent would be split 50-50 plus utilities. You'd have your own space, your own bathroom. My mother lives in the suite out back, so there's privacy. House rules are pretty simple. Respect each other's space, clean up after yourself, standard roommate stuff. Does that work for you? Yes, I said quickly, relief flooding through me. Yes, that all sounds perfect. I can move in whenever works for you. I don't have much stuff and… This weekend, he said. Move in this weekend. I'll text you the address, though I'm sure you remember it. There was something in his voice when he said that last part, something that made my chest ache. Of course I remembered it. I'd spent countless weekends there, cooking dinner with Margaret, falling asleep in Daniel's arms on his couch, imagining a future where that house became our home. But that was before. That was a different life, a different version of us. I remember, I said softly. And Daniel, I just want to say, let's not. He interrupted again. Let's just keep this simple, okay? Roommates helping each other out during a difficult time. That's all this needs to be. Okay, I agreed, even though my heart was breaking all over again. Roommates, nothing more. I'll see you this weekend. See you then. He hung up before I could say anything else, and I sat there holding my phone, wondering what I'd just set in motion, wondering if moving back into Daniel's life was an answer to my prayers, or the biggest mistake I could possibly make. I moved into Daniel's house on a Saturday morning in mid-April, when the world felt suspended in amber, frozen in a moment none of us understood yet. The moving process was surreal, loading my belongings into a borrowed car from a friend who'd fled to Connecticut, driving through empty streets that felt post-apocalyptic, arriving at the familiar house in Queens that held so many memories I'd tried desperately to forget. Daniel met me at the door, wearing a faded Pratt Institute t-shirt and jeans, his hair slightly longer than I remembered. He helped carry my boxes without much conversation, just polite directions about where things should go, his eyes never quite meeting mine. Margaret appeared briefly from her suite out back, giving me a warm hug that made my throat tight, whispering that she was glad I was here, that everything would work out the way it was meant to. I wanted to believe her, but standing in that house again felt like stepping into a beautiful dream I'd voluntarily walked away from, and now I had to live with the consequences. My room was on the second floor, across the hall from Daniel's bedroom, a space that had once been a guest room, but now felt like neutral territory. It had a queen bed, a small desk by the window, and an attached bathroom that would be mine alone. Daniel showed me where the towels were kept, explained the quirks of the old radiator, told me the Wi-Fi password, then retreated downstairs to his home office without another word. I unpacked slowly, hanging my clothes in the closet, arranging my toiletries in the bathroom, setting up my laptop on the desk. With each item I put away, I felt the weight of what I'd done settling over me like a heavy blanket. I was back in Daniel's life, living in his house, sleeping across the hall from him, but we were strangers now. Polite, distant strangers sharing space out of necessity rather than choice. But something unexpected happened on my second day there, something that felt like a small miracle in the midst of chaos. I received an email about a temporary administrative assistant position, a 6-month contract with a small marketing firm that had gone fully remote. The pay wasn't great, barely enough to cover my half of expenses, but it was something. It was hope. I had a video interview that afternoon, and by evening they'd offered me the position starting Monday. When I told Daniel over an awkward dinner of takeout Chinese food eaten at opposite ends of the kitchen table, he nodded and said congratulations in a tone that suggested he was genuinely happy for me, but didn't want to engage beyond that. We were two people living parallel lives under the same roof, careful not to let our paths cross more than absolutely necessary. The routine we fell into was painfully efficient. I woke at 6:30 every morning, showered and dressed, made coffee and toast in the kitchen before retreating to my room by 7 when my workday officially started. Daniel's job as an architect had gone remote as well, his firm adapting to virtual meetings and digital collaboration. His day started at 8, and I'd hear his footsteps on the stairs, the sound of him moving around the kitchen making his own breakfast, then silence as he disappeared into his home office on the first floor. We'd established an unspoken schedule for cooking, alternating days without needing to discuss it. One night I'd prepare something simple, usually pasta or stir-fry, leaving a portion for him on the stove before taking my plate upstairs to eat, while watching Netflix on my laptop. The next night, he'd cook, and I'd come downstairs after hearing him return to his office, serving myself in the empty kitchen before disappearing back to my room. We were ghosts, haunting the same house, aware of each other but never fully present in the same moment. 2 weeks passed this way, 2 weeks of careful avoidance and polite distance. I told myself it was fine, that this arrangement was exactly what we'd agreed to, nothing more than roommates splitting expenses during a crisis. But late at night, lying in bed across the hall from where Daniel slept, I'd remember what it felt like to fall asleep in his arms, to wake up to his smile, to share morning coffee and lazy Sunday afternoons. I'd pray, asking God for guidance, for peace, for the strength to accept this new reality. My faith had grown stronger over the past year, becoming the foundation I stood on, but it didn't make the loneliness any easier. It didn't erase the regret that gnawed at me every time I heard Daniel's voice through the walls, talking to his mother or on work calls, so close, yet completely unreachable. Then something happened that changed everything, a moment so small and unexpected that I almost missed its significance. It was a Thursday afternoon, late in my second week there. I'd finished work early and decided to do laundry, gathering my clothes and heading downstairs to the washing machine in the small utility room off the kitchen. I was outside hanging some delicate items on the clothesline Daniel had strung up in the backyard, my hands full of wet fabric and clothespins, when I noticed movement in the window of Margaret's suite. She was waving at me, gesturing for me to come over, her expression urgent but warm. I secured the last shirt on the line and walked across the small yard to her door, my heart rate picking up slightly. Margaret and I hadn't really talked since I'd moved in, just brief hellos when we crossed paths, and I wasn't sure what to expect. She opened the door before I could knock, pulling me inside her cozy space with a conspiratorial smile. Her suite smelled like cinnamon and vanilla, like comfort and home. Photos covered every surface, most of them featuring Daniel at various ages, grinning gap-toothed in elementary school, serious and focused in his high school graduation robes, confident and accomplished at his college ceremony. Seeing his life documented this way made my chest ache with all the moments I'd missed, all the future moments I'd given up. "Rachel, honey," Margaret said, settling into her favorite armchair and gesturing for me to sit on the small couch. "I need to ask you something, and I hope you'll say yes." "Of course," I replied, curious and slightly nervous. "What is it?" "Daniel's birthday is in 3 days," she said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Sunday. He thinks I've forgotten because I haven't mentioned it, but I want to surprise him. Would you help me? I'm planning to make some savory appetizers, but I thought maybe you could handle the cake and some desserts. I remember Daniel mentioning once that you were amazing at baking." My breath caught. Daniel had talked about me to his mother, even after everything, even after I'd broken his heart and disappeared. The thought made something warm and painful bloom in my chest. "I'd love to help," I said, my voice thick with emotion I tried to hide. "What kind of cake does he like?" "He's always loved red velvet," Margaret said. "But honestly, anything you make will be wonderful. And Rachel?" She reached over and patted my hand, her touch gentle and knowing. "He talked about you all the time, you know, even after you two separated. He'd come visit me and mention something funny you'd said, or a place you'd gone together, or how you always knew how to make him laugh when he was stressed. He never stopped loving you, dear. I don't think he knows how to." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I blinked them back, not trusting myself to speak. Margaret smiled sadly, squeezing my hand once before letting go. "I have all the ingredients you'll need," she continued, her tone shifting back to practical matters. "I made sure to stock up before everything shut down. You can use my kitchen whenever you have time. I know you're working during the day, so feel free to come over in the evenings or early mornings." I nodded, my mind already racing through possibilities. I'd taken several baking classes during my depression, finding that the precise measurements and focused attention required in pastry making gave my anxious mind something concrete to control. I'd gotten good at it, really good, creating elaborate desserts that looked like they belonged in fancy bakery windows. This would be my chance to do something meaningful, to show Daniel that I still cared, even if I couldn't say the words out loud. "I'll make a red velvet cake," I said, my voice stronger now. "And 3 specialty desserts. I learned some techniques last year that I think he'll love." "Perfect," Margaret beamed. "This will be wonderful, Rachel. Thank you." I spent the next 3 days in a flurry of secret preparation, sneaking into Margaret's kitchen during my lunch breaks and after work, carefully crafting each element of the surprise. The red velvet cake took shape over 2 days, 3 layers of deep crimson sponge with cream cheese frosting, decorated with delicate swirls and fresh berries I'd managed to find at a small grocery store, still open for essential shopping. For the desserts, I chose 3 sophisticated options I'd perfected during my baking classes: walnut cameos, delicate confections with caramelized nuts, and dark chocolate ganache. Lemon mousse cups made from tempered chocolate shells filled with silky Sicilian lemon cream, and panna cotta topped with red berry compote and delicate caramel threads that looked like spun gold. Each one was a tiny work of art, something that required my complete focus and attention, something that let me pour all the feelings I couldn't express into something tangible and beautiful. On the 3rd day, Saturday, I woke at 4:30 in the morning to finish everything, moving quietly through the dark house to Margaret's suite. She was already awake, sipping tea and preparing her savory appetizers, meat pies and stuffed pastries and delicate finger sandwiches. We worked side by side in comfortable silence, the kitchen filling with warmth and delicious smells. Around 6 a.m., as I was putting the final touches on the cake, piping decorative borders with a concentration that made my hand cramp, Margaret spoke softly. "He talks about you, you know, to me. When he thinks I'm not really listening, he'll say things like, 'Rachel would have found that funny,' or 'Rachel always said I worry too much about client opinions.' You're still part of his daily thoughts, dear. You never really left." I set down my piping bag, my hands trembling slightly. "I don't deserve that," I whispered. "I hurt him so badly, Margaret. I left when he needed me to stay. I convinced myself I was protecting him, but really I was just a coward. We all make mistakes when we're hurting," she said gently. "What matters is what we do next, whether we learn from them, whether we find the courage to try again." Her words stayed with me all day, playing on repeat in my mind as I worked, as I put the finishing touches on everything, as I carefully transported the desserts into the main house, while Daniel was out on a rare trip to the grocery store. Margaret and I set everything up in the dining room, covering it all with tablecloth so it would remain hidden. The plan was simple. We'd pretend we'd forgotten his birthday, act normal all day, then surprise him when he finished work at 5 p.m. Sunday arrived with gray skies and steady rain, the kind of spring storm that made you want to stay in bed under warm blankets. I heard Daniel moving around at his usual time, heard the coffee maker gurgle to life, heard his footsteps as he went to check on his mother, then retreated to his office. The day crawled by, each hour feeling like 3, my stomach twisted in nervous knots. What if he hated the surprise? What if bringing up celebrations and joy just reminded him of everything we'd lost? What if I'd overstepped, pushed too far into a life I'd voluntarily left behind? At 4:55 p.m., Margaret texted me, "Time. Meet me in the dining room." I saved my work file, closed my laptop, and crept downstairs. Margaret was already there, lighting candles on the cake, her face glowing with excitement. We heard Daniel's office door open, heard his footsteps heading toward the kitchen, probably looking for an easy dinner option. Margaret called out, her voice casual. "Danny, can you come help me with something in your dining room real quick?" "Sure, Mom," he called back, and I heard him change direction, his footsteps approaching. The moment he opened the dining room door, Margaret and I started singing, our voices blending in the familiar birthday song. Daniel froze in the doorway, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to something that looked like joy mixed with pain. His eyes found mine across the cake, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. Then Margaret was hugging him, pulling him into the room, and the moment broke. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," Margaret said, kissing his cheek. "Did you really think I'd forget?" "I thought maybe with everything going on." Daniel's voice was thick with emotion. He looked at the spread of food, at the elaborate cake, at the carefully arranged desserts, and I saw the exact moment he realized how much work had gone into this. "Did you make all of this?" "We both did," Margaret said, gesturing to me. "Rachel did the cake and desserts. I handled the savory items. It was a team effort." Daniel's eyes met mine again, and I saw 1,000 questions there, 1,000 things unsaid. "Thank you," he said quietly. "This is really special." I stepped forward and gave him a brief hug, the kind roommates might share on special occasions, but the moment my arms went around him, muscle memory kicked in. My body remembered what it felt like to hold him, to be held by him, and I had to force myself to pull away before I did something stupid like start crying. "Happy birthday, Daniel," I managed to say, my voice almost steady. We served ourselves, filling plates with Margaret's delicious appetizers, settling into the living room since the dining table was covered with food displays. Margaret claimed the armchair, leaving Daniel and me the couch, sitting with careful space between us. We ate and talked about small things, safe topics like how work was going, what shows we were watching to pass the time, how strange it felt to live in a world where going outside required masks and paranoia. It felt almost normal, almost like before, except for the elephant in the room that none of us acknowledged. After we'd finished the appetizers, Margaret insisted on cutting the cake. Daniel hadn't tried it yet, still picking at a savory pastry, looking content and relaxed in a way I hadn't seen since I'd moved in. Margaret served generous slices, and I took a bite immediately, the rich chocolate and tangy cream cheese frosting melting on my tongue. Perfect. I'd nailed the texture, the moisture level, the balance of flavors. "This is different," Daniel said, studying his slice. "I don't think I've ever seen a red velvet cake decorated quite like this. It's beautiful, Rachel." "You should try it," I said. Then without thinking, without planning it, I scooped up a forkful of cake from my plate and held it out toward him. "Here." The words and gesture were automatic, pure instinct from 1,000 shared meals during our relationship, when we'd constantly steal bites from each other's plates, feeding each other like it was the most natural thing in the world. I realized what I'd done a split second too late, my hand frozen in midair, the fork hovering between us. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, and I saw him remember too, saw the same memories playing across his face. For a heartbeat, I thought he'd pull away, would remind me that roommates don't do this, that we'd established boundaries we couldn't cross. Instead, he leaned forward and accepted the bite, his lips closing around the fork, his eyes never leaving mine. The intimacy of the moment crashed over me like a wave, and I felt heat rise to my cheeks. I pulled the fork back, setting it down on my plate with trembling fingers, not trusting myself to speak. The cake suddenly tasted like ashes in my mouth, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. "That's delicious," Daniel said softly, his voice carrying undertones I couldn't quite read. "Really amazing, Rachel." I glanced at Margaret and caught her smiling, her phone in her hand. She'd taken a picture of that moment, captured it like it was something worth preserving, and the knowing look in her eyes made my stomach flip. She saw what I was trying to hide, saw what I was just beginning to admit to myself. I wasn't over Daniel. I'd never been over Daniel. Living in this house with him, seeing him every day even in passing, watching him exist in the world, it was all waking up feelings I'd convinced myself were dead. Feelings that had never actually gone away, just gone dormant, waiting for the right moment to bloom again. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. We tried the specialty desserts, Margaret raving about each one, Daniel eating them with appreciation but careful distance, like he was afraid to enjoy them too much. Around 8 p.m., Margaret announced she was tired and retreated to her suite, leaving Daniel and me alone with the remains of the celebration scattered around us. We cleaned up in awkward silence, moving around each other in the kitchen like dancers who'd forgotten the steps, loading the dishwasher and putting away leftovers and wiping down counters without making eye contact. "Thank you again," Daniel said as I dried the last serving platter. "For all of this, you didn't have to do any of it." "I wanted to," I replied honestly. "You deserved a good birthday, even in the middle of all this craziness." He nodded, started to say something else, then stopped himself. "Well, good night, Rachel." "Good night, Daniel." I went upstairs and lay in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment with the cake over and over, feeling his presence across the hall like a physical force. Something had shifted tonight. Some invisible wall had developed a crack, and I didn't know whether to be terrified or hopeful about what that meant. The next morning, Saturday, I came downstairs for coffee around 8 and found Daniel in the kitchen, already showered and dressed. "Morning," he said, his tone neutral. "I'm going to hang out with my mom for a bit this morning. Just keep her company. She's been pretty isolated lately." "That's sweet of you," I said, meaning it. "I was going to do some cleaning around the house if that's okay. I know we're both busy during the week, so I figured I'd tackle some of the common areas today." "Sure, yeah, that'd be great. Thanks, Rachel." He left through the back door, crossing the small yard to his mother's suite, and I poured myself coffee before getting started. I cleaned the kitchen first, scrubbing surfaces that didn't really need scrubbing, organizing cabinets that were already mostly organized, finding comfort in the mindless tasks. Then I vacuumed the living room, dusted the shelves, moved to the upstairs hallway. I was standing outside Daniel's bedroom, debating whether cleaning his personal space would be crossing a line, when I decided to just ask him later. But I should at least straighten up a bit, make his bed maybe, as a thank you for letting me stay here. I pushed open his door, and the scent hit me immediately. His cologne, his detergent, that indefinable smell that was just Daniel. The room was neat, his bed already made, clothes put away, desk organized. I smiled despite myself, remembering how he'd always been the tidy one in our relationship while I'd left shoes scattered and jackets draped over chairs. I started in the corner, dusting his bookshelf, straightening the architectural models he'd built in school, and that's when I noticed it. A wooden box on his closet shelf, slightly visible because the closet door was ajar. It was the kind of box you'd use for keepsakes, personal items, things too important to throw away but too precious to display. I shouldn't look. I knew I shouldn't. This was an invasion of privacy, a violation of the boundaries we'd carefully established. But my hands moved before my brain could stop them, reaching up, pulling the box down, setting it on his bed. I opened it slowly, my heart in my throat, and what I saw inside made my breath catch painfully in my chest. Photos of us, dozens of them, printed and carefully preserved. Us at Central Park, laughing at something off camera. Us at his college graduation, my arms around his neck, both of us grinning like we'd won the lottery. Us at a restaurant on what I remembered was our 1-year anniversary, dressed up and happy and so completely in love it hurt to look at. Beneath the photos were other things, small treasures I'd given him over the years. A silly birthday card with a terrible pun I'd found hilarious. Movie ticket stubs from our first date. A pressed flower from the bouquet he'd given me on Valentine's Day. Every small piece of our relationship, carefully saved, carefully preserved. And at the bottom, nestled in velvet, were 2 rings. My hands shook as I lifted the small box, opening it to reveal a simple but beautiful engagement ring, a round diamond on a delicate platinum band, and beside it, a matching wedding band. I pulled out a piece of paper tucked beneath the box, unfolding it with trembling fingers. It was a draft, notes for a proposal speech, Daniel's handwriting covering the page. Rachel, from the moment I met you at that party, I knew you were going to change my life. I just didn't know how completely, how beautifully, how permanently. You've made me better, made me braver, made me believe in the kind of love I thought only existed in movies. I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you've made me. I want to build a future with you brick by brick, room by room, creating something beautiful together. Rachel, will you marry me? A tear splashed onto the paper, and I realized I was crying, silent sobs shaking my shoulders. He'd been planning to propose. That week I'd broken up with him. He'd been carrying these rings, rehearsing this speech, preparing to ask me to spend forever with him. And I'd destroyed it all, shattered everything because I was too broken to see what I was throwing away. The magnitude of what I'd done crashed over me like a tsunami, the weight of it crushing, devastating, unbearable. I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it, closed the box, returned it to the shelf, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it twice. I finished cleaning his room in a daze, moving on autopilot, then retreated to my own room and collapsed on my bed, burying my face in my pillow as I cried. I prayed through my tears, begging God for guidance, for wisdom, for some sign of what I was supposed to do with these feelings that were threatening to overwhelm me. I'd hurt Daniel so deeply, broken something precious, and I didn't know if it could ever be repaired. I didn't know if I deserved a second chance, if either of us could survive the risk of trying again. That night, exhausted from emotion and cleaning, I fell asleep early, my body demanding rest even as my mind raced. But sleep brought no peace, only nightmares. I dreamed I was being chased through dark city streets by a faceless man, his footsteps echoing behind me no matter how fast I ran. When he finally caught me, grabbing my arm with bruising force, he leaned in close and whispered that he was going to hurt me, that there was nowhere I could hide, that I'd never be safe. I woke up gasping, my heart racing, sweat soaking my sheets, the residual fear from the dream clinging to me like cobwebs. I lay there in the darkness, trying to calm my breathing, telling myself it was just a dream, just anxiety manifesting in sleep, but the fear wouldn't dissipate. My room suddenly felt too big, too empty, too full of shadows and possibilities. I thought about calling my mom, but it was 3 a.m. and she'd panic if her phone rang this late. I thought about praying until the fear passed, but I needed something more tangible right now, something solid and real. I needed Daniel. Before I could talk myself out of it, I threw off my covers and padded across the hall, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floors. I knocked softly on his door, hoping he'd hear but not wanting to startle him. A moment later, a light clicked on, and his door opened. He stood there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair messy from sleep, his eyes heavy and concerned. "Rachel? What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I had a nightmare," I said, feeling ridiculous now that I was standing in front of him. A grown woman scared of bad dreams like a child. A really bad one. "I know this is weird and we're just roommates and I shouldn't ask, but could I maybe sleep in your room tonight? I just really don't want to be alone right now." He studied my face for a long moment, and I saw him weighing the request, considering the implications, the dangers of blurring lines we'd drawn. Then he stepped back, opening his door wider. "Of course. Come on." His room was warm and dimly lit by the bedside lamp. I stood awkwardly near the door while he pulled back the covers on the far side of his bed, the side that used to be mine when I'd slept here a lifetime ago. I grabbed a spare pillow from his closet and placed it down the center of the bed. A physical barrier, a statement of intentions. "Just to be clear," I said, my voice small, "I'm not trying to cross any lines or make this complicated. I just feel safer when I'm near you. Is that okay?" "It's okay," he said softly. "Get some sleep, Rachel." I climbed into bed on my side of the pillow barrier, and he turned off the lamp before settling on his side. The darkness wrapped around us, intimate and charged. I could hear his breathing, feel his warmth radiating across the small space, and suddenly everything felt both terrifying and exactly right. My body remembered this, remembered falling asleep beside him, remembered the security of his presence. Within minutes, the fear from my nightmare had faded, replaced by something gentler, something that felt almost like hope. I fell asleep listening to Daniel breathe, and for the first time since moving in, I slept peacefully through the night. When I woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through his window, and I was alone. Daniel had already gotten up, giving me privacy, respecting the boundaries we'd established even after I'd crossed them. I went back to my room, showered, and headed downstairs, finding him in the kitchen making breakfast. "Morning," I said cautiously. "Thank you for last night, for letting me stay." "Anytime," he replied, not quite meeting my eyes. "Bad dreams are the worst. Glad you slept okay after." We didn't talk about it again, both of us retreating to our separate corners once more. But something had changed, shifted in ways I couldn't fully articulate yet. The walls between us felt thinner, more fragile, like they might shatter completely if either of us pushed too hard. Later that evening, I remembered something I'd done over a year ago, something I'd almost forgotten about. When my depression had been at its worst, when I couldn't bear to see Daniel's name on my phone, I'd blocked his number, cutting off all contact. But we were living together now, sharing a space, sharing a life of sorts. It didn't make sense to keep him blocked, to maintain that digital barrier when we were breathing the same air. I went into my phone settings and unblocked his number, a simple action that took less than 5 seconds. What I didn't expect was what happened next. My phone exploded with notifications, a year's worth of undelivered messages flooding in all at once. 52 messages from Daniel sent over 12 months of silence, each one a small piece of his heart that I'd never received. My hands shook as I started reading them, tears streaming down my face as his words filled my screen. "How are you, Rachel? I know we're not together anymore, but I still care about you. Please take care of yourself. Hope you're doing okay. Thinking of you today. Happy birthday, Rachel. I hope this year brings you everything you need to be happy. I saw something today that made me think of you. Hope you're finding your way. No path leads to happiness. Happiness is the path. Hope you're walking yours with peace." On and on they went. Messages of encouragement and hope, questions about how I was doing, gentle reminders that he still cared even though I'd pushed him away. Never angry, never accusatory, just consistently kind, consistently present, consistently loving despite my absence. I read every single one, my heart breaking and healing simultaneously with each word. Daniel had never stopped reaching out, never stopped caring, never stopped hoping I was okay. While I'd been blocking him, avoiding him, trying to protect myself, he'd been sending love into the void, trusting that somehow, someday, it would reach me. I wanted to go to him right then, wanted to knock on his office door and tell him I'd just read every message, that I was sorry, that I'd been so wrong about everything, but I couldn't find the words, couldn't figure out how to bridge the gap I'd created. So I saved every message, reading them over and over late into the night, letting his past words fill the space my fear had created, wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance for us to find our way back to each other. The days that followed became a delicate dance of proximity and distance, of moments that felt almost like before mixed with the careful awareness that we weren't those people anymore. We'd evolved separately, grown in different directions, and now we were trying to exist in the same space without colliding too hard or retreating too far. I carried those messages with me like a secret treasure, reading them whenever doubt crept in, whenever I questioned whether Daniel could ever forgive me for the pain I'd caused. His words from the past gave me hope for the future, even as our present remained complicated and uncertain. One evening, about a week after I'd unblocked his number, I was in my room working on an assignment for my MBA program when I heard Daniel's voice through the wall. He was on the phone, and his tone caught my attention immediately. Animated, warm, filled with laughter and genuine enthusiasm. I found myself listening despite knowing I shouldn't, my curiosity morphing into something darker, something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. "That sounds amazing," Daniel was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the thin wall. "Yeah, I'd love to see pictures when you're done. You always did have incredible taste." "No, I'm doing okay, all things considered. Work is busy but good. Mom's healthy. The house is the same as always, you know how it is." A pause, then more laughter. "Actually, I do have a roommate now. Yeah, because of the pandemic. Someone I knew from before who needed a place. It's been fine, mostly. Strange sometimes, but fine." Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had softened, become more intimate in a way that made my stomach clench painfully. "I don't know. Maybe. It's complicated. But hey, let's not talk about that now. Tell me more about the project you're working on. The design sounds incredible." I closed my laptop, unable to concentrate anymore, my mind spinning with questions I had no right to ask. Who was he talking to? An ex-girlfriend? A new romantic interest? Someone from work? The rational part of my brain reminded me that Daniel was a single man who had every right to talk to whoever he wanted, that I'd given up any claim to his personal life when I'd walked away. But the irrational part, the part that had been slowly awakening over the past month, felt a sharp stab of possessiveness that scared me with its intensity. I had no right to feel this way, no right to care who made him laugh like that, but I couldn't stop the emotion from flooding through me. I lay in bed that night questioning everything, examining my feelings with the kind of brutal honesty that faith had taught me. Was I falling for Daniel again? Or had I never really fallen out of love with him, just buried those feelings under layers of depression and self-protection and fear? The answer terrified me because it meant acknowledging that I'd thrown away something precious, something I might never get back, and that living here watching him exist without me might slowly tear me apart. The following Saturday morning, I woke up feeling terrible. My head pounded, my throat ached, and my body felt like it had been hit by a truck. I managed to drag myself to the bathroom, confirming in the mirror that I looked as bad as I felt, my face pale and my eyes glassy. It wasn't the virus, thank God. I'd been so careful about that. Just a regular illness, probably a spring cold combined with stress and exhaustion. I crawled back into bed, sending a quick text to Daniel letting him know I wasn't feeling well and would probably stay in my room all day. I must have fallen back asleep because the next thing I knew, there was a soft knock on my door. "Rachel, can I come in?" "Yeah," I croaked, my voice barely working. Daniel entered carrying a tray, and the sight of it made my eyes sting with unexpected tears. He'd made French toast, the kind he used to make for me on lazy Sunday mornings, dusted with powdered sugar and cinnamon. A cappuccino in my favorite mug sat beside it, along with a small bowl of fresh-cut fruit, strawberries, and melon arranged carefully. It was breakfast in bed, the kind of gesture that spoke of care and attention and intimacy. "You didn't have to do this," I said, my voice thick with emotion and congestion. "I know," he replied, setting the tray carefully on my lap. "But you're sick, and I remember you always felt better when someone took care of you. So let me take care of you today, okay? Just as friends, roommates helping each other out." But it didn't feel like just roommates as he sat on the edge of my bed, making sure I had everything I needed, asking if I wanted him to bring medicine or extra blankets or anything else. It felt like something more, something that existed in the space between what we were and what we used to be. I ate slowly, the French toast perfect and comforting, tasting exactly the way I remembered. Daniel stayed while I ate, telling me about a project his firm was working on, keeping the conversation light and easy, and I realized this was the longest we'd talked face-to-face since I'd moved in. "Thank you," I said when I'd finished, setting the tray aside. "This was really special. You didn't have to be so thoughtful." "You'd do the same for me," he said simply, and the truth of that statement hung in the air between us. I would. I absolutely would, because despite everything that had happened, despite the time apart and the pain caused, I still cared about him deeply, maybe more than I'd been willing to admit. Our conversation drifted to lighter topics, and somehow we ended up discussing streaming shows we'd been watching separately in our rooms. When I mentioned a new detective series that had just launched, Daniel's eyes lit up. "I've been wanting to watch that. Everyone at work has been talking about it, but I hate starting shows alone. They're better when you can discuss them with someone, you know? We could watch it together," I suggested before I could overthink it. "Tonight? After dinner? If you want to, I mean. No pressure." "Yeah," he said, a small smile crossing his face. "Yeah, I'd like that." The illness turned out to be minor, just a 24-hour thing that left me feeling better by evening. We ate dinner together that night, actually sitting at the same table for the first time since I'd moved in, talking about random things like old times. After we'd cleaned up, we moved to the living room, settling onto the small two-person couch because it faced the TV better than the armchairs. There was barely a foot of space between us, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, smell his familiar cologne, notice the small details I'd tried not to see over the past month. The show was good, a crime procedural with compelling characters and plot twists that had us both guessing. About halfway through the second episode, there was a scene where a detective used a polygraph test on a suspect, watching the readout spike when the person lied. Daniel made an interested sound, pausing the show. "I wonder if those things actually work," he mused. "Like, can you really detect lies just from physiological responses?" "There are apps that claim to do it," I said, using the phone's sensors. "I don't know how accurate they are, but we could try one if you're curious." "Yeah, let's do it," he said, already pulling out his phone to search. "This could be interesting." We found one with decent reviews, downloaded it, and spent a few minutes reading the instructions. It claimed to measure micro-tremors in your voice and hand steadiness to detect stress responses associated with lying. Probably not scientifically accurate, but entertaining nonetheless. "Okay, here's the deal," Daniel said, setting up the app. "We take turns asking questions. We only answer yes or no, nothing else. No maybe, no explanations, just yes or no. And we have to answer honestly, or at least try to. The app will tell us if we're lying. Sound fair?" "Fair," I agreed, my heart already starting to race with anticipation and anxiety about where this might lead. "I'll go first," Daniel said, positioning his phone so it could pick up my voice. "Ready? First question. You said that finding faith helped heal your depression. Are you happier now than you were a year ago?" I thought about it, about how far I'd come from that dark place, about the peace I'd found through my relationship with Jesus, about how faith had given me tools to manage my illness and find purpose beyond my pain. "Yes," I answered firmly. The app's screen flashed green. "Truth." "My turn," I said, taking the phone. "Are you happier now than you were a month ago before I moved in?" Daniel didn't hesitate. "Yes." Green. Truth. Something warm bloomed in my chest at his answer, at the confirmation that my presence here mattered to him somehow. "My turn," Daniel said. "After we broke up, did you ever check my social media to see what I was doing?" "Yes," I admitted, feeling my cheeks heat. I'd done it occasionally, late at night when I was lonely, scrolling through his posts like they were windows into a life I'd left behind. Green. Truth. "Did you check mine?" I asked, already knowing the answer from his earlier messages. "Yes." Green. Truth. We continued back and forth, the questions getting gradually more personal, more revealing. Then Daniel asked the question I'd been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. "We've been living together as roommates for a month now. In that time, have you developed feelings for me? Romantic feelings?" My breath caught. This was it. The moment where I could keep hiding or start being honest. I thought about the rules, about how we could only say yes or no, No maybes or explanations allowed. I thought about the engagement ring hidden in his closet, about his messages spanning a year, about the way my heart raced every time I heard his voice. I thought about playing it safe, about protecting myself from potential rejection and pain. No, I said, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. The app screen flashed red. Lie detected. Daniel's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't comment, just handed me the phone for my turn. My hands were shaking now, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. After we broke up, did you date anyone else? Were you in a relationship with someone? Daniel held my gaze as he answered. Yes. Red. Lie detected. He was lying, and we both knew it. He'd lied to make me jealous, to level the playing field, or maybe just to protect himself from seeming too available, too pathetic, too still in love with someone who'd walked away. Okay, I said quickly, setting the phone aside, my voice unsteady. I think we should stop. This app clearly works, and we've learned enough. Rachel, wait, Daniel said. But I was already standing, needing space, needing air, needing time to process the fact that we'd just admitted through lies and half-truths that we both still had feelings for each other. Daniel, I need to say something, I started, the words tumbling out before I lost my courage. I've been thinking a lot these past few weeks, and I owe you an apology. A real one, not just a quick sorry, but an actual acknowledgement of what I did to you, to us. He stayed silent, waiting, his eyes never leaving my face. When I was going through my depression last year, I was drowning, and I convinced myself that ending our relationship was protecting you from being pulled under with me. But that was selfish, Daniel. It was cowardly. I only thought about my pain, my struggle, my need to isolate. I didn't think about what you were feeling, how much it would hurt you to be shut out completely. My feelings were numb, anesthetized by depression, but yours weren't. You were fully present, fully feeling, and I just left you there to suffer alone. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I kept going, needing to get it all out. After I found faith, after I started healing and pulled myself out of that dark place, I should have reached out to you. I should have at least let you know I was okay. But I was too scared, too ashamed, too worried that you'd moved on, and I'd just be disrupting your life. Then I met someone else, dated him for a few months, and I realized now I was trying to prove to myself that I could have feelings again, that I was capable of connection. But it wasn't real, because he wasn't you. And I'm sorry, Daniel. I'm so deeply sorry for all of it, for every moment of pain I caused, for every message I didn't receive, for throwing away something beautiful because I was too broken to see its value. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then Daniel stood, crossed the small distance between us, and took my hands in his. His touch sent electricity through me, familiar and new all at once. I never stopped loving you, Rachel, he said, his voice raw with emotion, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Not for a single day, not for a single moment. The week you ended things was the week I was planning to propose. I had the ring, had rehearsed what I'd say, had picked out the perfect spot in Central Park where we'd had our first kiss. And when you said you needed time, needed space, it destroyed me. But even then, even when I was angry and hurt and confused, I never stopped loving you. His grip on my hands tightened, his thumbs tracing circles on my skin. I wanted to be there for you during your depression, wanted to help you fight through it, wanted to prove that real love doesn't run when things get hard. We weren't married, but I'd already made that commitment in my heart, in health and sickness, for better or worse, until death separates us. That's what I believed. That's what I still believe. Daniel, I whispered, his name breaking on a sob. I'm glad you found faith, he continued. I'm glad you found healing and peace and a relationship with God that changed your life. I'm glad you're better, genuinely glad. And I understand why you didn't reach out afterward. I do. But Rachel, you have to know that I never gave up hope. Every message I sent into the void was an act of faith, a belief that somehow, someday you'd come back to me. And here you are, living in my house, sleeping across the hall, and every day has been beautiful torture because I can't stop hoping that maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. We stood there, holding hands, tears streaming down both our faces, the space between us charged with possibility and fear and desperate hope. I don't know who moved first, whether it was me or him or some mutual magnetic pull we couldn't resist. But suddenly we were closing the distance, our bodies coming together, and then his lips were on mine and everything else disappeared. The kiss was everything. A year of separation, a month of careful distance, a lifetime of feelings compressed into this single moment. It was desperate and gentle, hungry and reverent, an apology and a promise and a homecoming all at once. His hands came up to cup my face and mine wound around his neck, and we kissed like we were drowning and each other was oxygen. Time stopped mattering. The world outside ceased to exist. There was only this, only us, only the truth that some connections are too powerful to break no matter how hard you try. When we finally pulled apart, both breathless and trembling, I looked into his eyes and saw my own feelings reflected back at me, multiplied and magnified. "I love you, Daniel," I said, the words clear and certain and true. If I had any doubts before, I don't anymore. I love you. I never stopped loving you, even when I couldn't feel anything else. And I want this, want us, want everything we talked about building together. If you'll give me another chance, if you'll trust me not to run again, I promise I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you made the right choice. "I love you too," he said, his smile breaking through tears like sunshine after a storm. "I've always loved you. I'll always love you." We stood in his living room holding each other, crying and laughing and kissing between declarations of love and whispered promises, piecing back together what had been broken, building something even stronger from the fragments. That night, I didn't go back to my room. We fell asleep in his bed, in each other's arms, the way we should have been all along. I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through his window and his arm around my waist, his breath warm on my neck, and felt peace settle over me like a blessing. This was home. He was home. And I was never leaving again. The next 6 months transformed everything. We existed in a bubble created by the pandemic, the world outside our door dangerous and uncertain, but inside his house, we built something beautiful. We worked during the day in our separate spaces, but shared meals, shared evenings, shared a bed and a life. I talked to Daniel about my faith, about how Jesus had met me in my darkest moment and offered light, about how Scripture had become my anchor and prayer my lifeline. He listened thoughtfully, asked questions, but never committed. I didn't push, just prayed privately every night that the seeds being planted would someday bloom, that God's timing would be perfect, even if it wasn't my timing. By October, as the world slowly started reopening, I'd begun attending church services in person again, masked and distanced, but desperate for community and corporate worship. Each week I'd invite Daniel to come with me, and each week he'd find a reason to decline. Work deadline, tired, not feeling well, helping his mom with something. After the 4th invitation, I stopped asking, not wanting to pressure him, trusting that God would work in his heart when the time was right. Then one Saturday evening in late October, I asked one more time, expecting the usual polite refusal. Instead, Daniel surprised me. "Okay," he said simply. "I'll go with you tomorrow." "Really?" I couldn't hide my shock or excitement. "Really? I've been thinking a lot about what you've shared with me, about your journey and your faith, and I want to understand it better, want to see what transformed you so completely. So yeah, I'll come." That Sunday morning, we got ready together, my hands shaking slightly with nervous excitement as I picked out an outfit. The service was beautiful, the worship music stirring something deep in my soul like always. The pastor's message focused on redemption and second chances. But halfway through the sermon, I glanced at Daniel and saw tears streaming down his face. Not quiet tears, but full sobs shaking his shoulders, his hand gripping mine like a lifeline. The pastor was talking about how God meets us in our brokenness, how Jesus came specifically for the broken and hurting and lost, and something in those words was reaching Daniel in a place I'd never been able to touch. After the service ended, Daniel went forward during the altar call, and I followed, watching through my own tears as he prayed with one of the church leaders, accepting Jesus as his Savior, surrendering his life and his pain and his future to God. We held each other afterward in the parking lot, both crying, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. Daniel had found faith, had encountered the same Jesus who'd saved me, and we were no longer just united by love, but by shared belief, shared purpose, shared eternity. 2 months later, on my birthday in December, Daniel planned something special. We had a small celebration at the house, just us and Margaret, eating cake and laughing about how much had changed in a year. After we'd finished dessert, Daniel stood up, his expression nervous and excited and determined. "Rachel, there's something I need to do," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Something I should have done a long time ago." He got down on one knee right there in his living room, pulling out the velvet box I'd seen hidden in his closet months earlier, and my breath caught in my throat. "Rachel, a year and a half ago, I planned to ask you this question in Central Park under the cherry blossoms. But life had different plans, took us on a journey through darkness and pain and separation that I never could have anticipated. But looking back, I can see God's hand in all of it. You needed to find faith. I needed to learn patience and trust. We both needed to grow individually before we could grow together. And now, standing here with you after everything we've been through, after losing each other and finding our way back, after discovering faith together, I'm more certain than ever that you're the person I want to spend my life with. Tears were already streaming down my face, my hands covering my mouth. You've made me better in every possible way. You've shown me what real love looks like, the kind that doesn't give up even when things get hard, the kind that keeps believing even through the darkest nights. You've introduced me to Jesus, which is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. And now I want to make you a promise, the same promise I wanted to make before, but with deeper understanding of what it means. Rachel, I promise to love you in health and sickness, in joy and sorrow, in good times and bad, for the rest of my life. I promise to build a future with you, brick by brick, room by room, creating something beautiful together. I promise to point you toward Jesus when you forget the way, and to let you do the same for me. Rachel, will you marry me? Yes, I sobbed, barely able to get the word out through my tears. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the ring on my finger, the same ring he'd bought over a year ago, and it fit perfectly, like it had been made specifically for this moment. We kissed while Margaret cried happy tears and took pictures, and I felt the pieces of my life finally clicking into place, the story coming full circle in a way I never could have written myself. We married 6 months later in a small ceremony at our church, surrounded by friends and family, speaking vows that meant more because we'd tested them already, because we'd proven that our love could survive the worst and emerge stronger. We bought a house in Queens, close enough to Margaret that we could check on her regularly. And over the next few years, God blessed us with 2 beautiful children, a boy and a girl, who we raised in faith and love, teaching them about the Jesus who'd saved us both. Now, years later, looking back on that season of my life, I can see God's fingerprints all over it. My depression wasn't punishment, but a path toward finding faith. My separation from Daniel wasn't the end of our story, but the middle chapter, the part where we both had to grow alone before we could grow together. The pandemic wasn't a disaster, but a divine appointment, forcing us back into the same space at exactly the right moment. Every broken piece, every painful moment, every tear shed, it all served a purpose in God's perfect plan. If you're walking through darkness right now, if you're drowning in depression or heartbreak or circumstances you can't control, I want you to hear this truth. God is in the darkness with you. He hasn't abandoned you. He hasn't forgotten you. He's working behind the scenes, preparing something beautiful from your brokenness, writing a story you can't see yet, but that will make perfect sense when you look back. Don't give up. Don't stop believing. Don't run from the people who love you or from the God who created you for this exact moment. Your hardest season might be the very thing that leads you to your greatest transformation. Your deepest pain might be the crack through which the light finally gets in. Your biggest mistake might be the starting point for your most beautiful redemption story. Trust the process. Trust the timing. Trust the God who makes all things new. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we come before you with humble and grateful hearts, acknowledging that you are the author of every story, the healer of every broken heart, the redeemer of every lost soul. We thank you for never giving up on us, even when we give up on ourselves. We thank you for loving us through our darkest moments, for pursuing us when we run, for welcoming us home when we finally turn around. Lord, we pray for everyone who hears this story, everyone walking through their own season of darkness or pain or confusion. Wrap your arms around them, Father. Remind them that they're not alone, that you're with them in the fire, in the storm, in the valley. Give them strength for today and hope for tomorrow. Help them see that their current chapter isn't the end of their story, but the middle, and that you're already writing the beautiful ending they can't yet imagine. We pray for broken relationships to be restored, for wounded hearts to be healed, for lost souls to find their way home to you. We pray for anyone struggling with depression or anxiety or any form of suffering that they would find professional help, spiritual support, and the courage to keep fighting. Use our stories, our testimonies, our pain transformed into purpose to point others toward your love. In Jesus' precious name, we pray. Amen.